Welcome to the Property Funder podcast. You're here with Michael Dean, that's me, and I'm joined today by Chris. Chris, do you want to give us your full name and tell us the business that you represent and what that business does?
Sure. My name's Chris Gardner. I'm the CEO of Atelier. We're a leading development finance lender. We focus on the living sector, and by that I mean residential care, purpose-built student accommodation and build to rent.
Right, now that's great, Chris. Now, obviously, that's a sector I know a little bit about, having a business that operates in a similar sector as well. But we're going to get into the meat of things and how you got here, and I guess what the future holds for you. First of all, before we do get into that, I note behind you, obviously some of our audio listeners won't be able to have the benefit of it, but you have quite a nice picture. If you just lean to one side, you can show people.
Lean that way.
Yeah, as someone who's as someone who likes a little bit of music, quite like David Bowie. So would that be was that your artwork, your choice, Chris? Are you a big David Bowie fan?
Well, there is an interesting story behind that. So we moved to our offices 2.5 years ago. The interior of the office was something that we focused on quite a lot, both with our new landlord and with our marketing company. The team and I spent a lot of time doing that, a lot of time outside of the business, making sure the interior was lovely when everyone turned up. And as a gift, my management team got a David Bowie picture, because I know I'm a big Bowie fan, done in our corporate colours. So it was screen printed, which was very nice, and obviously sits behind me.
Yeah,
reminding me of the great man every time I come into the office.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. It's 8 years since he passed.
It's shocking. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very hard to believe. I grew to discover David Bowie's music, I suppose, in my mid-20s, which helped me connect with my father-in-law, who's born in the mid-50s, and his youth was very much as a sort of Ziggy Stardust, David Bowie, dressing up and crazy haircuts and hairstyles in the 70s. It certainly helped me connect with him, developing a fondness for his music, and certainly a real genius and legend, and someone that is clearly fondly missed by many around the world. But going back to things a little bit more professionally then, so Atelier was formed in what year? Was it 2018? I got that right? 2017, 2018, that sort of time?
It was 2018. So I think I posted on LinkedIn recently. It was Boxing Day 2018 that we actually gave the company its name. I happened to be working that day. So Atelier as an entity has been running for about 4.5 years, 6 months in the planning. We actually launched the business in the middle of 2019, but it's basically 5 years old now. And what a 5 years that's been.
That certainly has, and I guess we'll come to that. How did talk us through your career journey up to the point of forming Atelier? Because obviously, the vast majority of our audience, I think, is either specialist finance professionals or aspiring entrepreneurs. Yeah. And I think certainly I think for both of those kind of audiences, your story as to how you got to founding Atelier, is going to be very interesting for people. So, what did you do kind of leaving school, university? What was the career journey?
Well, I never knew what I wanted to do, Michael. I left school, didn't really know what I wanted to do, didn't really know what I was good at. Fell into a job where I spent a few years as a draftsman, because it was something that I was reasonably good at school. Jumped around a few jobs after that, so this is in the very early 20s, did a stint in recruitment, did a little bit of work in retail, and various other bits and pieces, as I was trying to find something that both interested me and sort of inspired me. I fell into financial services. It was a chance meeting with a neighbour. This guy was involved in the residential mortgages business. I was looking around for something to do. I'd recently got a mortgage myself, and it was a pretty abysmal experience. We sold a mortgage, an investment product through an IF. It was a pretty grim experience. And I thought to myself, well, actually, this mortgage broking lark looks like it's quite interesting. So this was in the 90s. Got into mortgages, as it was back then. A very, very nascent industry in terms of the broker side, and got traction pretty quickly. Built a mortgage business throughout the late 90s and the early noughties, and we had two facets. We had a business to consumer brand. We were one of the very early movers on the internet, and we were one of the very early movers on selling financial products over the phone rather than through face to face. So we grew that business to about 150 staff, and then in the mid noughties, I was doing a lot of business with Bear Stearns, the US investment bank, and Bear Stearns purchased our business. Obviously, what came after 2005, so I worked with Bear Stearns for a couple of years, but then of course the GFC came along, and that pretty much changed everything. Bear were one of the first to go down. They didn't quite do it at Lehman's. They were bought by JP Morgan. We were doing mortgages, we were doing buy-to-let and various other types of mortgages for them. That business closed down as a result of the GFC. I had another business which was in Italy, which was a property management and property development business. And I picked up the family and we moved out to our house in Italy. Spent a couple of years there developing that business, riding out the storm that was going on in the UK, as I'm sure you'll remember too. And then we sold that business in Italy, moved back to the UK, and then I spent various stints consulting for various organisations over the next few years. So that was my entry into financial services. Then that's a sort of 10 or 11 year span of it. And then more recently, I got a call from Metro Bank in the early, about 2013, I would say. They were looking to develop their mortgages business, wanted to expand their operating model to cope with much higher demand. Went into Metro Bank on what should have been a 3-month gig, ended up spending 3 years there helping them build their mortgage business. And then I went off to got a call to go and do a similar kind of internal consultancy role at Amicus Group. And Amicus, for some of your listeners will know, were a fairly large bridge, one of the very first, actually, a very significant size bridging and development lender. Went in there, they were trying to pursue a bank license and various other different business strategies, which actually ended up resulting in the administration of that business. And that's actually how I met M&G, who are a significant investor in Atelier, through that administration. So along the way, so I've kind of given you the highlights there. Along the way, there were various other interesting projects. I consulted on specialty finance for a number of organizations as I went through that as well. And, you know, as such, over that 25 year period, I've built up a fairly significant network and a fairly significant knowledge of how the specialist finance market works, both at the front end, whether that's B2B or B2C, but you know, how it works at the back end in terms of capital markets, banking, etc.
I mean, there's a huge amount to unpick there. You know, you've built a mortgage business. What was the name of the mortgage business that you sold to Bear Stearns?
It's National and Capital Mortgage Corporation, and then that was the B2C side, and the B2B side was a business called ICMG, and that was ostensibly a packaging and distribution business.
I mean, you know, you had a sort of pretty colourful, you know, 20s, and you setting up a mortgage business. You know, you employing hundreds of people, sell to Bear Stearns. You then get, you know, then obviously Bear. I remember it because I was still quite early in my career at the time. Bear then got acquired by JP, as you said, and then effectively the business that you established kind of was it sort of shut down overnight, essentially.
More or less. I mean, it was again. I don't reflect on this so much these days because it's a dim and distant past. But it must have been over the course of 2 or 3 months. It went from being a very successful business to one where there was no I mean, all of the lenders that are in that specialist lending market exited, more or less.
And then you had a property management company in Italy. I mean, how
So
how did that come about? I mean, you know, you're obviously pursuing a pretty intense role within your mortgage businesses.
So there's been a family affinity with Italy for a number of years. We would go on holiday there, and you know, we would we just had a love of it, Italian culture. We owned a couple of properties out there on Lake Como, and it was a side hustle, you'd call it now. It was something we enjoyed doing because we were Brits that spoke a bit of Italian. People would always come to us for property advice when we were there, and we thought, you know what, there's a business here, and knowledge is as a value. And we created a small business as a sideline. My wife ran it at the time, and it got traction pretty quickly. And for us, you know, there wasn't much going on in the specialist finance market. That business was thriving, and we just thought, well, you know, what the hell, now or never. The kids were young enough that we could lift them up from the UK, take them to Italy. They went to school in Italy. It just all worked out. But I think, you know, we spent a couple of great years there. We had a lot of fun, but it was never going to be a long-term gig. It was something that was just a moment in time. And perhaps with some of the other questions that we'll talk about, I'm one to seize opportunities as they come along. You're only here once, and make the most of it while you're here.
Well, quite. I have to say though, I mean, I've always had a bit of a yearning to go and live and work in continental Europe, and there's you know, I wouldn't say I had a few false dawns, but certainly there's a strong attraction to it. What would you say the pitfalls are for someone, you know, I'm sure there are lots of our listeners who have the idea of going and living and working in sunnier climes. I often have debates with my sort of some of the dads from school in our sort of WhatsApp chat group, where we sort of try and weigh up the options of if you are going to leave the UK, where you're going to go, and you always sort of end up back in the UK.
Well, that's really interesting, and that's a really interesting observation, because what would my reflections be? It's first, it's not like being on holiday. When you live in there and work in there, it is not like being on holiday. So you have to disassociate. Maybe if you're going to somewhere that you've holidayed, which is typically what people do, you have to disassociate your holiday experience from your daily existence of living and working there. I think that's pretty hard. You absolutely 100% have to learn the language, and when you are there, you will realize what a great country the UK is for starting a business. Everywhere else that I'm speaking from experience in Italy, but I've shared stories with other people that have set up businesses in other countries. It's far easier to set up a business and get going in the UK than it is anywhere else. So lots of bureaucracy overseas, lots of what we would consider to be odd customs, strange taxes, odd practices. And I guess that's partly one of the reasons why we knew that when we went out, and probably partially one of the reasons why we decided to come back. It was, where are we most likely to be successful? And it was in the UK economy, with the way that we're geared up towards business. However frustrating it feels at times when you're in the UK, go and try it somewhere else.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I'm involved in a agricultural business in Poland, and whilst I'm sure compared to sort of communist days, the bureaucracy and red tape has eased off quite considerably. You know, those habits for bureaucracy, they do die hard. And I mean, looking at somewhere like Italy, and I don't know how interested you are or how actively you're looking at AI, for example, but in a country like Italy, I think they've banned ChatGPT. And they've banned AI, and I think that a number of other European countries have followed suit. So as an entrepreneur, you know, as entrepreneurs, what we're looking to obviously find ways that we can progress, right? And I think there's one of the challenges that maybe they have in continental Europe, and which obviously makes the UK, you know, comparatively much more attractive as a place to do business, is that there seems to be a too aggressive effort to maintain customs and practices, and you know, effectively protecting existing jobs without realizing that the new jobs that could be created on the back of that, and it's, you know, certainly is a symptom possibly of a wider decline within Europe. And I speak as someone who's a pro-European, but when you see things like that happening, it makes it very difficult to reconcile your pro-European views and the reality.
Well, I would agree with that. And if you take property development, which is a business that we're both involved with, from a financing perspective, very, very strong demarcation lines in Italy. So if you're hiring there's no such thing really as a general contractor. Everybody out there has got very strict demarcation lines. There's somebody that does the windows, there's somebody that does the rendering, there's somebody that does the roofing. It's everyone has their roles and responsibilities, and it's the same with professionals. So it was a tough business environment operating out there, but you know, it was great fun at the same time and a wonderful life experience. And the legacy of that experience is with my children today, who have an incredible affinity for Italy, speak a bit of the language, and you know, have to go back every year to pay their respects to where they spent some time in school and got friends there, and that's great.
I suppose so if you're in Lake Como area, it's not too difficult to get to. You know, it's a quick flight to Milan, isn't it? And a hours drive.
Yeah, or you can drive it in or you could back then drive it in a day. You know, if you left early, you get home at midnight. You could do that in a day.
That's pretty cool, isn't it? And I'm curious to know, you know, were there any people in dark suits, you know, knocking on your door, you know, putting their hands out, asking for their 5 or 10% tribute?
No. So this was northern Italy, which again, I've not got a great deal of experience of the south of Italy, but I'm told that's more prevalent there. The north is very interesting because Lake Como is very close to the Swiss border. So culturally, it feels to me it's kind of got the best of Swiss, which is punctuality, formality, accuracy, with that Italian flair for life. And I think it was a nice combination. We were 15 miles from the border, so it was very much the best of both worlds. So we didn't see any of that, thankfully. But I'm sure it exists.
And of course, you know, you're being so close to the Swiss border, having a friend who also had a place on Lake Como. We once had a night there and then drove to San Moritz. So presumably your skiing got pretty good while you were there as well.
Well, I've never skied, but we would go to San Moritz. So if you had a really hot summer, we would often go up to San Moritz for a couple of days in the middle of August, because it would be about 10 degrees in the middle of August, and you might be 36 degrees with high humidity on the lake. So it was somewhere we used to go. And Medesimo, we go up to the snow parks in Medesimo in the winter for a bit of fun.
Oh, that's nice. It sounds like a very very idyllic lifestyle. We'll have to go back to professional matters, otherwise we'll go down some very niche rabbit holes. I mean, would you say you're very naturally entrepreneurial, or do you think that's something that's evolved over time?
I think I am naturally entrepreneurial. I think it's I don't really know where I get that from. I'm constantly curious, always trying to do things better. I have a lot of ideas. I think I'm relatively creative, and I think that drives you down that route. It's a little bit like my experience with my mortgage. It was having a relatively rough experience arranging what I thought was a very simple mortgage in the 90s that got me thinking, actually, there's got to be a better way here. The experience I'm having here must be common with everybody. And it was that experience that got me thinking about mortgages, business I'd never been involved with before, had no formal experience, but you know, you can see a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's one of the good things about property and property finance is that you know, and I speak as someone who had never even worked in a lender before setting one up, is that, you know, that in some ways the barriers to entry are low. Obviously, you know, we had some good knowledge of property investment and development in any event, but at the end of the day, it's quite nice that it's quite an accessible industry for someone relatively new to it, can still be pretty successful quite quickly in it, which I think it speaks highly of the UK specialist finance market, that if you've got a good proposition and you've got your head screwed on right, you'll generally do quite well. And then I suppose we go to, if we want to sort of fast forward then to the formation of Atelier. You mentioned you were involved with Amicus up until sort of its end. So talk us through how it came about. So obviously you Boxing Day 2018, where you sort of decided to come up with a name and form it and started to plan the launch. But what was the thought process before that? What made you want to effectively set up a development finance business?
Well, if you look at the development finance business and the bridging business, and we go back, if we're going back, got to go back to about 2011 when I first started looking at this industry, and I was asked to by a group of investment bankers that were thinking of doing it, was to give them a report on the bridging and development market. And back then, it was relatively speaking a handful of lenders. So there were no more than half a dozen lenders carving up 60 or 70% of the business that was available at the time, and then it was business that had a very, very long tail. So of the remaining 25 or 30% of the business, there were literally hundreds of small private lenders in that market. That theme continued right the way through from 2012, even to today in some respects. Probably no more than a dozen lenders are probably carving up 60 to 70% of the business, and there's a very, very, very long tail of smaller lenders and family offices, etc., that are active in this market. So a lot of it is a cottage industry. Why did I find the challenge of setting up Atelier so exciting? So I think I saw there was a great opportunity there to bring in some of the changes that had happened since the GFC. So you saw the rise of the brand after then. So consumer brands came to the fore, where consumers were favouring, strong brands that had a strong meaning, with this need, as it was at the time, to sort out this underserved market. And I thought, if you could take the very best DNA out of a B2B business and a B2C business and launch into this space of development and bridging, you could really make a difference. So that's what that was the opportunity for me. And what do I mean by that? Well, having a strong brand, which is recognizable, that means something to your target market. And then the very best of B2B, it's having strong governance, operating like an institution, having a very strong ethical or moral compass. So I felt this was a market that would respond to that. And I think that is really what set us off on the opportunity. Plus, it's a market where there are decent returns available. Maybe not said that throughout 23 as we had all the volatility, but there are decent returns available, risk-adjusted returns. And actually, it's real estate. And, particularly if you're in resi real estate and you're a lender like Atelier or like yourselves or like others, you actually get to make a real difference, because often you are funding tired, rundown real estate opportunities, repurposing them and putting them back into useful ownership. And I think that's quite satisfying.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And obviously our respective businesses serve different segments of the market, but at the end of the day, I always am most proud of our sort of finish and exit / part complete product, which Avon was probably most well known for. Ironically, not always because of the rescue jobs that we come in and do, because that those are obviously valuable, but the fact is that when we talk about value add to the economy, we're often working with first-time developers or early-stage developers, and one of the biggest issues that we have in the UK housing market is the majority, a bit like you're saying, the dominance of a half a dozen lenders back in 2011, 2012. The UK house building market, we've seen a huge reduction in the plurality of developers, and the challenge that obviously that comes with is that if you don't have experience, you're not going to. If you don't have experience, you're not going to get the backing financially. If you don't have the track record, if you're not active, you're not buying new sites, and if you're not, and ultimately, you just end up with the same half a dozen or 2 dozen national house builders who basically decide how much volume is coming into the market. So if you're able to increase the number of small and medium-sized house builders who are not going to land bank, they're actually going to build, they're going to help alleviate the housing crisis. But then also, if they get a bit stuck for any reason, and sometimes it's just because they're with the wrong lender or the wrong bank, or their lender, we've actually got a situation where we're effectively stepping into the where you're stepping into the shoes of a lender that's failed. We've actually got a failed lender that we're taking out at the moment in one particular deal. But it's not just the developers, is it, Chris? We're also talking about, that there's so many professionals that are involved, and so many subcontractors that us by financing these projects, we're giving work to these people. And if the banks aren't lending, then those people are less likely to have a trade, to be able to earn a living. Well, so
I completely agree with that. There are huge supply chains, and particularly where you look at an aging workforce, if you don't keep those supply chains fed and watered, those skills are lost. Those people leave the market. And when I kind of look at strategy for this year or strategy for last year, as it was when we were looking at this year ago, you look at the number of homes that have been delivered, and about half of those are from our respective target markets. They're the smaller SME property developers, so they are making a huge contribution to the economy, and it's firms like ours and others, and that are keeping those developments and those developers liquid, and that's something to be proud of.
Yeah, and I suppose also, from our own perspective, if you're working at, I don't know, I'm not throwing Lloyds under the bus because they're perfectly good institution, but if you're doing development finance, let's say Lloyds, for example, how likely are you to go out of your way to go and help your clients find new sites? As one example, if you're working with Barratt or Bellway or Taylor Wimpey, fill in the blank, there's a land director who deals with all of that, and they don't no relationship manager at Lloyds is going to turn around to the guy at Barratt and Bellway and say, here's a site that's really interesting. Whereas people like ourselves, I had a land agent reach out to me for one of my other businesses yesterday, I've got this site actually quite close to where I live, and I said to him, do you know what, I don't think that wouldn't be for any of my development businesses, but I know that there's a developer locally who's built 6 different developments just like this in the last 5-10 years in this location. I'll introduce him to you. We can talk to him about the financing. You can do the intro for the land and get a fee out of that. And it's where businesses like ours can be real. We add real value to SME development businesses in a way that bigger banks, institutions just won't, because they don't have the incentives to do so, and they're not geared up for it. So we're patting ourselves on the shoulder obviously here because and talking about how great we are, but it's not just you and I, Chris, is it? We know our peers across the specialist finance industry, whether it's development, bridging, whether it's buy-to-let, commercial mortgages, the smaller independent lenders, we do add a lot of value to people to entrepreneurs in the industry.
If you aggregate together all of the lending that's done by lenders in the kind of non-bank space, we are as a group systemically important. If those lenders weren't there isn't actually anybody ready to step in for a variety of reasons, particularly with the smaller size. Loans under 50 million now are not attractive to the large banks, and actually a lot of the skills that the clearing banks used to have years ago, the kind of boots on the ground local bank manager, those skills have been lost. So it's now very, very difficult for those SME developers to obtain funds through the banking route.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of those, those sort of old school bank managers, a lot of those people have ended up in broking, haven't they? They've
either ended up in broking, yeah, they've ended up in broking, they've retired, or they're working for organisations like ours.
Yeah, no, quite. So, I mean, do you want to talk us through the early days of the early days of Atelier and what that looked like?
Yeah.
Because again, for a lot of our listeners, maybe they had no, just an insight into what it looks like to actually form and found a lending business, especially one with the shape and makeup of your own.
M&G have been a fantastic investor for us. Very, very innovative, very creative, but also at the same time bring that institutional DNA. Most of the people that are involved in our business here come from a regulated background. So the team we've hired have been minded to operate as if we were regulated from day one. But having that imperative from M&G has certainly helped shape the culture and ethos of this business. Right at the very beginning, when we launched the business, we took baby steps. We were very cautious. So we were roughly 50-50 bridging and development back then. Much smaller loan size. Average ticket was about $1 million, and we spent that first year getting to know each other. So management team as we were growing, M&G as our investor. We spent most of that year sort of just getting to know each other. And then we, if you like, launched the business. So we were operating below the line. We were originating a few loans, putting our systems and processes in place, getting to understand credit risk appetite and all of that kind of good stuff. We launched the business, if you like, into the market in early 20. Well, the plan was to launch it into the market in early 2020, and of course COVID came along. So M&G at that point stood squarely behind us. No one knew what the impacts of this pandemic were going to be, but we carried on. We continued to fund loans, and we kind of grew very, very cautiously. I think what the pandemic did do for us, and this is a positive, is it brought the future forward. And I think it did that for a lot of businesses. Our business plan was always to be a dev lender, bigger ticket, active in a variety of different asset classes, and try to create this kind of best-in-class platform. That was always the business objective. And I think what COVID did is it brought that plan forward. We found a lot of good credit risk opportunities in larger loans and in dev loans, and because that's what we were seeing, we accelerated the process of our average loan size, starting to do more dev, making sure that we had the right kind of team in place to sort of manage whatever the unexpected consequences would be of the pandemic. So whilst it was an absolute terrible time for many people on a lot of levels, for us it did accelerate the growth of the business. So when we came out of the pandemic, we had a much clearer idea of the lender that we wanted to be and what we needed to do to grow it. And the other thing I think the pandemic did, for a new lender coming to the market, you know what it's like in difficult times, all relationships are up for grabs. So when liquidity dries up a little bit, when you've got lenders altering terms, and I'll completely understand why they might have done that in that market, it got us a seat at the table pretty quickly. We had people coming to us, are you lending? What will you do? Will you do this deal? And we did actually make quite a few good, high quality connections through that period too. And that gave us the sort of springboard to really launch the business once the pandemic had finished.
Yeah, I mean, I can really associate with that. That the pandemic was a springboard for us, I think, as well, in many ways, even though the sort of lending volumes did take a slight hit in 2020, because we, like many in the market, were we weren't closed to business, but our funding routes were constrained for 3 or 4 months, in the sort of the peak pandemic months in the early days. Yep. But what we benefited from was that because people were quiet, brokers were quiet, there was an opportunity to have conversations with people that you wouldn't ordinarily get, albeit, okay, it might be on a video call like this, but at the same time, and one of the issues we had with our BDMs would say to us at the time was like, well, we haven't got much of a product to sell. We've got this very restricted product. I said, sod the product. The product is not the relevant point here. Point is that you've got an opportunity to build a relationship with someone and get to know a broker and know what they do and learn more about them and identify whether there's someone that's worth investing time and effort in over the long run. But you talk about them, find out about them. They will then like you because if you don't, in my experience was, if you don't talk about product once, at some point the broker will turn around to you and go, what, tell me about your products. But if your opening line is, now let me tell you about my products, they're going to be like, oh yeah, here we go again. So we had this great opportunity to build relationships with brokers on the back of that, and I suppose developers as well. And then when our funding came back to life, in a proper way, we were able to capitalize on that. And then, we effectively doubled from 2020 to 2021 as a result of that. So I think it's very, kind of different, but very similar parallels there, where, so with so many brokers that they'll say, well, I always do that kind of, I always do my refurb business with, lender X. And so, you're only going to get an opportunity with that broker to do that kind of business when lender X lets them down once or twice. So, you're kind of next man up. But, and I guess you very much were a beneficiary of that, where particularly, I suppose, larger dev loans, you were there when other people weren't. So people are like, right, well, we're going to have to give Atelier a go.
And I think that's right. And I think also as well, we had very similar conversations with internally and with our originations. It was a very small team at the time, and we didn't focus on what we couldn't do, and that what we couldn't do is really as a function of where we thought credit risk was. But we go best foot forward, and we can't do what you want, but we could do this, and we did that a lot. We just told people what we could do, not what we couldn't do, and we didn't write a huge amount of business, but we did deals, and we won a lot of new friends. And that was the positive from what was a very negative time.
How did you go about persuading M&G to not only go more development focused, but also go up the ticket size curve? Because for listeners that don't haven't got experience in senior management of lending, particularly in the development finance space, institutions that fund development and bridging lenders or specialist finance businesses as a whole, the bell curve from a risk, well, I say bell curve, but the curve in terms of appetite for risk is, you have the most number of people wanting to do residential regulated mortgages, then you have buy to let, then you have bridging, and then you probably 1/10, if that, of the number of people that would do bridging would have appetite for development. So how did the conversation go with M&G around their appetite for development? Clearly, when you started out doing a mix of bridging and development and smaller ticket stuff, there was that to me would appear like you were trying, kind of just dipping your toe in the water and sort of trying to get proof of concept.
I think it was that it was about proof of concept and about establishing your appetite. Having worked in numerous lenders and observed numerous lenders, you can take a group of people who are all very experienced, all worked at lenders with a clear lending appetite and a clear identity. You could take those individuals and create a new lender, but that new lender doesn't benefit from any of the legacy of the previous experience around things like appetite. So you have to understand, what is a good Atelier loan? What does that mean? And you hear brokers say this all the time. Oh, that looks like an Atelier deal. Or it might be that looks like a Hampshire Trust deal, or that looks like a Shawbrook deal. That takes time to establish that. So we very much had to go through a process of test and learn, and bring M&G along, and other investors, and even our own team on that journey. What does a good deal look like for this business? So that's again, partially what the pandemic months or years helped us. So we got comfortable with a greater emphasis on development loans and a greater emphasis on larger loans as a result of experiencing them. So gradually writing larger loans, gradually writing longer loans, more of them being dev. That's where we saw a lot of credit risk that as a group, the business and our investors, we felt comfortable. So that's how we did it. So it was a program, it was a process over time, rather than a sort of big bang pivot from one strategy to another.
Do you think from an institutional perspective there's a misunderstanding of or almost maybe within the market more generally of a mispricing of risk between bridging and development, and that particularly, you know, that actually, because my view is that when you do a development loan, yes, you've got construction risk and you've got the sort of the risk you do have a counterparty risk, which is not inconsiderable. But from a credit perspective, you know, if you're lending at say 65 loan to GDV on a development loan, I know sometimes I think sometimes you can go up to 70, whereas bridging, you're often doing 75 or 80. And whilst yes, you don't have that construction risk component, you only need a valuer to have a bad day in the market to move a small amount, and you find yourself, you know, right up against it from a credit perspective. I mean, where do you stand in terms of, you know, the appropriate, you know, I suppose that relative risk between bridging and development, especially, and what you get paid for it?
So I think looking at it, observing now, there's probably an oversupply of bridge funding in the market. And any oversupply of any funding usually results in downward pressure on price. So I think we've seen that. If you're in the market for a bridging loan, there, you know, even with interest rates where they are today, there are some great deals out there for anyone that needs one. I think also it's been far easier to raise capital to fund a bridging lender, or easier, maybe not far easier, but it's been easier because it's a very straightforward. You've got an asset, it's finished, it's sitting there, it's got a value ascribed to it. And I think conceptually for banks or institutions lending in the capital markets, it's quite straightforward. I think as soon as you start to get into development risk, is the point you were making there, that is when capital doesn't always understand that risk. And I think as a result, they tend to shy away from it. If you look at the larger loan space, we tend to focus with our investors not to look on the loan size, but to look at the underlying granularity. So, all right, it's a £10 million loan, but it's actually funding 50 individual units. So focus on the individual granularity, not the actual loan size. And that's been a process that we've gone through to try to help people get their head around it. But I do think also there's been a huge expansion in the use case of bridging loans. I think, you know, people are using them for a variety of reasons these days that maybe they weren't 10 years ago. And it's a highly competitive sector. And that's why, certainly for us, we do bridging loans. But there are better options out there if you want a straightforward bridging loan. We will do a bridging loan when it makes sense on a developer's journey. So we might use bridging to support an existing developer that wants to tweak planning on a site as a precursor to us doing a dev deal, or where there is some kind of other value accretive work going on. What we're not very good at is you give us a property worth £5 million, whatever it is, a block of flats, and we just give you a 70% advance against it, and the risk is all exit risk. That's not where we're not good at that.
No, look, and you know, actually, that ironically, that exit bridge, that sort of larger exit bridge, is something we Avonmore probably are a little bit better at, maybe in the market, you know, relatively speaking.
Well, funnily enough, I think a development lender is probably better placed than most to do a development exit loan, because you understand the dynamics of selling down units. It's something we do on every loan. So actually having the discipline and the underwriting rigor around particularly around sales as an exit is probably something that works for a dev lender, actually, I would say.
I think also in terms of the technical side of things, that sometimes, you know, if you're not a development lender, you don't quite understand what this all, you know, there's all the sign-offs that are required, and you know, certain bridge lenders can go one of two ways on that, can't they? They can either be too cautious because they don't really understand the risk, or they can be or they can be a little bit too cavalier, and they end up with units that they can't shift because certain sign-offs haven't been obtained, and they may be a while before they can be obtained. So
that said, though, developers out there have got a huge amount of choice at the minute, and I think it's a very competitive, both in the dev space as well. It's a very competitive market. There are lots of bridging options around. I think there's a lot of flexibility, and I think, you know, that's got to be good for the market.
I think for the consumer, the consumer being obviously the SME developer, it's definitely a good time. You could say maybe where there's a weakness in the market is the lack of mezz and equity options for developers, especially those where they've got schemes that are selling slowly.
Agreed.
And they can't take equity out of them. We can obviously touch on the market a little bit more in a moment, but I wanted to sort of ask, you know, in terms of, so, you know, you obviously had a nice springboard from the pandemic, but what would you say the biggest inflection point was in terms of, you know, where Atelier is now, where, you know, whereas as a suppose award-winning lender now with a very solid place in the market, competing with as names like Hampshire Trust, UTB, Paragon, to name but a few, but you know, very much firmly sat within that cohort, and you know, being one of the first phone calls from developers and brokers alike. What would you say the inflection point was that has put you into that position, as, you know, the real springboard moment?
So that's a really good question, and the conversation I was having just before I came on the phone to you was with our marketing director, because we're thinking about what we do for the next year. 2.5 years ago, we always knew that we were going to need to make a very significant investment in the brand, and we began the process of making that investment about 2.5 years ago. So we've had a very, very well curated and very, very clear brand development strategy, which has driven a lot of the work we've done, and that encompasses a whole plethora of things. So I'm not just talking about kind of advertising, but the whole kind of way we communicate with the market, the way we position the brand, the way that we position it in terms of the competitor set. So, and very kind of you to say that we're up there on the top table. I very much appreciate that. But that's been very much a planned activity to get to that space. Most of our competitors have been in the market a lot longer than us. People that we would consider to be competitors have been in the market a lot longer for us. They've developed trust over time because they've been in the market maybe 10, 15 years. We have had to try to develop that trust over a much shorter period of time. So focusing on this kind of marketing and business development activity has been something that's been really important for us. So the inflection point, to answer the original question, was that 2.5 years ago. That's when we decided the time was right. We were more or less out of the pandemic. That's when we activated our strategic plan to do that.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned that, but again, not knowing your business intimately, but knowing, you know, stuff that I hear on the grapevine. Now, as I understand it, your business, or you and your investor or investors, this is the rumor that I heard, and you can confirm or deny it, procured quite a large interest rate hedge for a reasonable amount of money, and that then enabled you to, when interest rates started to climb very aggressively from the beginning of 2022 onwards, you were able to keep pricing fixed. And obviously that fixed rate pricing was for a long time, would have been for a long time a very big selling point, as everyone else was having to either move to floating rates or offer much more expensive fixed rates. So if I, from the outside looking in, I would have said, whilst your marketing and activation plan would have been very significant, in terms of elevating you to the top table, my analysis, albeit very armchair analysis, and I appreciate there's a lot more that goes into it, would be that actually that purchase of the interest rate swap and offering that fixed rate product when everyone else couldn't offer as competitive a fixed rate product or was floating would have been as much of an inflection point as anything else.
I think it's a really good observation, and I think if you were to think about a specific, I wouldn't necessarily say inflection point, but if I were to think about a specific set of actions that certainly drove a lot of growth last year, you're absolutely right. We actually started hedging in 21, and this comes back down to the institutional DNA of the organisation and the firepower that sits behind it. In fairness, in 2021, we like most lenders are exposed to, we've got a capital stack. Some of it is fixed in terms of its returns, some of it is floating. And in 2021, there was no real indication that interest rates were going to move, but we did have some exposure to some variable rate debt ourselves, and it was a governance play. So we made our first move into the market, and we hedged a couple of our positions. We continued to do that throughout 2022. The net result of that was, by the time we got to the very severe interest rate volatility of last year, we'd hedged our back book and we'd hedged all of our planned originations for the coming 2 years. So that is something that we deployed to the market through our fixed rate offering. And that, again, going back to that point, actually it's a very similar point on the pandemic, where it's a door opener, very much a door opener. And that has undoubtedly accelerated our growth. What's really interesting now, of course, is though inflation's gone up today, isn't it? Slightly. If we buy the argument that the next move on interest rates is down, we've been very focused on promoting our fixed rate offering. We began the process of we did have a variable rate option in the background, but of course nobody wanted that. They wanted fixed. So we're now repositioning to offer choice. So that's what we do. So we've not flip-flopped from fixed rate to variable. You can either have a fixed rate or you can have a variable. So we can offer people both, and let the borrower decide whether they're prepared to trade certainty for a bit of extra.
I want to ask your opinion on something, and far be it from me to give a quote unquote competitor ideas, but what do you think about the idea of a cap? So effectively a floating rate, but you cap but with a capped rate. So it's sort of it's fixed. Effectively, it's floating, but floating with a fixed upper limit. Is that something you've toyed with? Being a sort of
we did look at
interest rate hedging literate as you are.
Yeah, we did look at that, and I think we drew the conclusion that you're either one or the other. I think was the conclusion we got to. You're either as the borrower accepting the rate risk, or as the lender you're accepting the rate risk. And I think we just decided that offering something in the middle is not where we wanted to be. We did explore it, but it isn't something we've decided to pursue.
Well, now if you just allow a brief interlude, and speaking of marketing, but many listeners and viewers will know that I've been involved in Variety's props lunch and props awards for the best part of a decade now. In fact, I think this is my 10th year being involved in the various committees. This year, the props lunch and props awards is hosted a new venue for the first time. It's going to be at the Grosvenor on Park Lane. So it's only a short move. It's on the 27th of June and starts about 11:30. It's, as usual, it's going to be hosted by Martin Bayfield, and we'll have our usual excellent selection of industry grandees who will be recognised for their achievements in the year gone. If you are interested to get a table at this year's Props Awards. This is for listeners and viewers. Please go to the Variety website, and I'm just gonna go to it now, and I'm gonna give the address, so you can go. Oh no, that's not helpful. But if you go to Variety's main website at shop.variety.co.uk, you should be able to find your way to the Props Awards. Alternatively, please get in touch with me, and we can and I will direct you to Andreu, who runs the event, and we can get you a ticket. But tables are starting, if you've missed out on the early bird, they're starting at about £2,950 per table, but it's very good value, and there's plenty of sponsorship opportunities available. And I understand, Chris, you were successful in the larger lender category last year. You were recognised by your peers, by the industry, as the premier larger development finance lender in the country. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I also wanted to thank you for sponsoring the event last year. And I understand you're going to be a sponsor again, if my friend Jack is, if I'm not mistaken, from my friend Jack Bristow.
That is correct.
Yeah. So again, if you, so listeners and viewers, if you want to get the opportunity to meet with the best and the brightest in the industry, just like Chris, please come along to the event on the 27th of June. Now, just want to talk about like the challenges, the biggest challenges that you've experienced since the formation of Atelier. What would that have been? What do you think that the thing that you found the most difficult to get to grips with since you got started?
I think look, I mean, there have been the obvious ones, haven't there? COVID and the volatility of last year. I think in terms of the biggest challenges, I guess there have been several what I call lower level sort of business as usual challenges. It's been very difficult to hire staff. We've hired a great team here, but certainly post pandemic, hiring people, getting people to move was a challenge. But I guess if I kind of take a slightly higher helicopter view, there are challenges every day. I mean, one of the things about this business, and probably every other business, is that every day throws up a new challenge, and there's something new that you may not have ever dealt with before. And I think that's all part and parcel of the kind of CEO role. Generally, they're the cut and thrust of business, so it's what you signed up for. So don't complain about it. But I guess the biggest challenge for any business leader is sometimes that sense of isolation and loneliness, the sense that the buck stops with you, and that can be hard work intellectually and emotionally at times. And I would challenge anyone that kind of disagreed with that. You're responsible for your business. You come in every day, you're the boss of Atelier, or you're the boss of Avamore, or the boss of wherever it is, and you're trying to do your best, but actually you've got families, you've got the lives of your employees, and the good, all relying on the good fortune of your company. And and that isn't for the faint-hearted. And I think at times, particularly when you have got periods like COVID or interest rate volatility, which have all got the possibility for any business of being an existential threat, those things can weigh you down. And I think that's where you need to have a really good support network around you. You need to make sure that you've got a management team you can talk to, that you're not too aloof, and that from time to time you're prepared to take the mask off a bit and just have a straight conversation with somebody. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. And I don't think that's something that's just Atelier. Everything I've ever been involved with has had those moments.
Well, I mean, I suppose, do you have, when you have those sort of, lonely at the top moments, do you have, is there anyone you can lean on, either within your non-exec directors, or do you have a professional coach? Are there people you can turn to in that situation?
Yes, I think so. We've got a great management team here. We have really good relationships between everybody. So there's always a conversation to be had there. I've got one or two people outside of work who I can confide in. But I guess it's a small network of people that I kind of class in that, and of course you don't want to be a burden either. I mean, you have to suck a lot of this stuff up, so I have to be pretty stressed, and to actually reach out and speak to anyone is the answer there. You want to try and tough it out most of the time.
Yeah, that being said, that anytime I feel agitated, agitated about something, particularly professionally, but more generally, I do find that sharing that stress, sharing that concern with people, is that problem shared is problem halved type thing. If you and from my own personal experience, when I bottle things up, things really eat away at me. But the moment I sort of socialize that frustration or problem, everything goes away. I mean, I even gone to the extreme of when I've had some, when I've sort of had hate mail or been trolled, over email. You have a disgruntled customer or client sends you, nasty email or something like that. I've even gone as far as to screenshotting it and sharing it on Instagram, just to sort of put it out there, and actually it's almost like the moment I do that, the moment I do that, it all seems to go away.
Well, I think a lot of the time, particularly if you've got a problem, and it's a problem that's eating away at you, actually even just telling the story to somebody makes you realise some of the time it's not as bad as you thought it was. Actually, when the words are coming out of your mouth, you're thinking, hang on a second, I'm overblowing this.
Yeah, well, that's right. I think sometimes it enables you to get perspective, and you can become a bit more dispassionate about it. What do you see as your biggest challenges for the next 18 months as being?
Biggest challenges for the next 18 months is we've got ambitious plans to continue to scale the business. So hitting the business plan. Anyone hitting their business plan over the last 3 or 4 years will realise that hitting your business plan is a challenge, because it's constantly moving. So I think that's sort of challenge number one. It's also making sure that you can scale without taking any unreasonable risks. And I think that's why I'm so pleased I've got such an experienced team around me, because everyone is wired up in a very, very similar way. We know we've got to grow, but it's not growing at any cost. And I think, but at the same time, you've got to grow, right? This is a business where you have to sort of keep moving forward. So treading that fine line between seizing the opportunities that come our way, but actually not dropping the ball as we go along as best we can.
So, and when you started Atelier, how many of you were there from the original team? And I suppose what are your growth, and in terms of your growth plans, what would your headcount look like, say, in the next over the next 2 years?
So we started with 4 of us. That was when we moved into a little serviced office in the city, just around the corner from M&G. So there were 4 of us. We're 35 now. I think if you were to ask me this question, what current headcount in 2 years' time, I'm going to say 45. Seems like the right number, based on where we want to take our growth plans. And probably like yourself, a majority of the headcount here are what I call subject matter experts. So they're either in credit, asset management. We've got 3 chartered surveyors. We've got 2 lawyers. There's a lot of very, very skilled people. I think the next wave of people that we bring in will be about handling more production. So I suspect there'll be some opportunities here for grads, for example, and maybe some more junior staff to assist some of our more experienced colleagues.
And in terms of growth, are you looking at organic growth, or would you have you thought about any sort of? Are you thinking about any forms of acquisition? Acquiring some other lenders in in spaces, either, you know, adjacent spaces, that sort of thing. Would acquisitions be on the menu, or are you purely focused on organic growth?
Plan A is organic growth.
Yeah.
But you would never rule out anything. If the business case was right, then why not? I guess the big challenge of being acquisitive in the short term space is, by the time you've seen the opportunity, done the diligence, you know, the book is rolling off, and you know there are various challenges around that, and I think that you'd have to virtually re-underwrite everything that you were looking at acquiring. So I think unlike acquiring a mortgage business, where you're looking at acquiring a pool of assets that might have an average term of 20 or 25 years, if you're looking to acquire a dev business, that's slightly more challenging. But I'd never say never, Michael. It's one of those ones where, so plan A is to grow organically, but if it made sense, why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think interestingly, the sort of PE world is now starting to look at the specialist finance industry, and particularly the development market. And I think they do see an opportunity. And I think in lots of ways, and it's certainly my opinion as well, that, you know, looking at lenders in our space, and the value being the loan books, is probably a bit of a red herring. And actually the value proposition actually is in the teams and the ability to originate, and the relationships, and the ability to develop that sort of recurring profitability, as opposed to you know, an underlying loan book. But I suppose it very much varies from business to business. I suppose where my thinking's at, though, is that, you know, you mentioned about the sort of the very fragmented nature of the market, obviously with a concentration of lending going into sort of the same dozen names, say, with the 50-60% of that, and the bulk of it, the remainder of that then being, like you say, cottage industries, you know, mom and pop shops type thing.
Yeah.
You know, I think my instincts, and I'm curious to get where your thoughts are on this, I think that concentration of business, you know, I think that 50-60% goes to 70-80% probably by the end of the decade. You know, that the idea of this sort of the medium-sized players is I think you'll either be, you know, in my opinion, you'll either be a 10, 20, 30 million a year lender with, you know, with 3 or 4 of you, or you're going to be, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 plus people, you know, doing 250, 300 million pounds a year of lending. And the sort of the 50 to 100 million pound a year lenders, I think, you know, particularly in the bridging and development space, I think are going to become an increasing rarity. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I guess one of the things no one knows what this sector, the short-term property finance sector, looks like in a higher interest rate environment. So the sector that we refer to today came out of the GFC, when rates dropped down to 50 bips and then later on to 10 bips. So no one really knows whether or not the sector as it stands today will be able to stand that change. And I guess no one also knows what terminal rates will be. But let's say interest rates stabilise at 3%. It's been very easy. It's been a very easy sell to investors when you've got SONIA at 10 bips, and then you're offering them double-digit returns on bridging loans or dev loans. That's more of a challenge now. So I think that's going to be interesting, and could drive some consolidation or some withdrawal from the market potentially. Because I don't think borrowers are sucking up that 510 basis point spread between where rates haven't gone up by 5%, have they, generally across the bridging and development market. So it'll be interesting to see where that settles. I also think that it's just more expensive to run a debt platform or a debt operation within a bank than it was, say, 10 years ago. Standards have increased. The expectations of borrowers and staff has increased. It is no longer the case that having the money was all you had to do. If you went back to 2010, if you were a lender and you were liquid, you got loads of business, just by virtue of the fact that you were lending. And we know that's very, very different. So I think cost bases have increased. So I think it will be an interesting space to watch over the next 2 or 3 years. I don't see it going away anywhere. I just think it will just change. I think you're absolutely right. I think there'll be fewer lenders carving up
the same pie.
more of business.
I mean, I do think that the size of the market will be smaller. I mean, I'm assuming that you would have had the same experience as we did, that and I know you've certainly you're in a very good position over the last 18 months, particularly with your fixed interest rate offering. But actually one of the regardless of where you price your money, one of the biggest challenges, of course, is that there are fewer planning consents being granted. The developers don't have as much cash or equity available because sales are taking longer. Like LTCs and loan to GDVs are, let's call it 5% lower than they were, so they need to put more equity in. There's less mezz available because the mezz guys a lot of mezz guys are getting burned by the schemes that they're stuck in, and they're seeing their positions being eroded. Build costs up until recently have been going through the roof. Land prices haven't really moved, and we're seeing GDVs falling or being a little bit on the soft side with slow sales velocities. In that kind of environment, understandably, if you're a developer, a house builder, you're going to be quite reluctant to start on site and procure finance. So it does mean that lending volumes across the sector will have taken a hit. Is that something you've seen, and do you think, and do you see that situation improving? On
straightforward residential C3 for sale, absolutely 100% agree with that analysis. I think there are a number of reasons why that is. I think if you look at talk to most developers, they've seen no real softening in land values, or rather not land values. We've seen a softening in values, but not what vendors' expectations are.
Yeah.
So I think unlocking a lot of those sites, which are probably held on bridging loans, that have possibly been extended a couple of times, I think you might see in 2024 a number of those positions come to market.
Yeah.
Because if you work back, you're doing this every day life. You work back any dev proposal at the moment, it probably is valuing the land at half of what it was a year or 18 months ago.
Yeah.
That at some point has to crystallize, and it probably crystallizes when people are forced to sell those positions because they can't rebridge it, the existing lender can't extend, and they can't rewrite the loan. It means someone's got to do something with it. It either goes into LPA or somebody sells it and just takes a bath. And I think and you could argue that 2023 was a year where there was a lot of forbearance, a lot of sites changing hands, being bridged by other lenders. That will probably crystallize, I would say, in 2024. But real estate's a feast or famine industry, and it's always been the same. This is the third or fourth cycle I've been through, and I think GDVs will pick up, mortgage availability will improve, the music will start again. Those opportunities that are currently locked up with vendors that don't want to sell at a particular price at some point will come to the market. What will be bad news for the owner of the land that may be selling a £5 million position for 2.5 is another man's opportunity, and the music will start again, and we go again. And I think that probably won't be this year, but I certainly think come 25, I think we'll see a significant bounce. And again, with the planning issues, it simply cannot. You'd like to think it simply cannot go on. Something has to give. Maybe change of government will alleviate that in some way. But I suspect there is such a glut of land with planning that simply no one can unlock at the moment because of values and other issues, is the first thing that will squirt out maybe later in 24.
Well, interesting insights on observations. I guess time will tell, and we'll see how that plays out. I mean, in terms of your loan book, the loans that you've got under management at the moment,
yeah.
How was, particularly the one, well, I suppose across the board, how did you find the credit performance in 23? Because from our own perspective, we certainly had we certainly had more challenging loans, especially some mid-build where we're we're probably having to go down potential build out routes that we've not really experienced as yet. But for the most part, the sort of that up and built stock, stuff that was finished, we were getting out of reasonably well. What was your experience? What have you seen from your own portfolio?
I think similar to that, we've had developers that have done a great job getting the site to practical completion, built a really nice product in a good location, but for market conditions haven't been able to sell through as quickly as they would have liked. For those developers that are helping themselves, we're there shoulder to shoulder with them, helping them through restructuring loans, providing extensions, helping them with their marketing plans, and all of the kinds of things that you'd expect from a decent lender. There have been one or two loans that have, for a variety of reasons, been caught out by rises in construction costs and that kind of thing. And we have 3 chartered surveyors here, so we spend a lot of time on site trying to help those developers through some of those pinch points. We've seen, because the refinance market has been remarkably resilient, I think, throughout 2023. We've had 1 or 2 positions where people have refinanced to another lender to give them a second crack at it. So I think it's a mixed bag. Interestingly, on the sales side, we've noted that GDVs have held up. Going back to a point you were making, sales velocity has halved. We've seen GDVs hold up really well, but we've seen pockets of activity. So we've had some real surprises. We've got a couple of lovely schemes in the southwest where it's a variety of houses and bungalows. They've sold through really nicely. Yet we've got another scheme out in the home counties, close to a station, fantastic product, everything right about it, but it's completely focused at the first-time buyer market, and the first-time buyer market just isn't there.
Yeah, it's just dead. Yeah.
So there's it's a complicated picture, but I would say it's probably, when we were kind of doing our wargaming about a year ago, thinking where do we think this is going to go, we're probably upside case.
Yeah. Well, I do wonder if is there a sting in the tail, because it's been reasonably benign up to this point, hasn't it? It's been a fairly soft landing, notwithstanding, obviously volumes not being maybe where we want them to be, but from the performance of loans, they've performed, in that range of outcomes, like you say, is probably at the upper end of outcomes. And maybe there is a sting in the tail that we haven't thought about.
Well, to my mind, the absolute focus has to be on bringing first-time buyers back to the market, because if you're building £1 million house or 1.5 million, this down the line, there's a first-time buyer somewhere in the chain.
Yeah.
And since Help to Buy disappeared and interest rates have gone up, it's almost impossible. The average loan to value you'll get now on a new build flat is 75 LTV. Well, I don't know many young first-time buyers that have got a 65 grand deposit based on average house price. So I think that's something that the industry needs to focus on. I don't think enough is being done there either. No.
I would agree with that, and it does feel like this time around, Bank of Mum and Dad isn't quite as, the pockets of Bank of Mum and Dad aren't quite as effective as they have been in the past. Last professional question, and then we can get up to a couple of personal questions before we let you get on. What's the long-term plan for Atelier? What is it? Is it keep growing, and but at some point, would you be looking at a listing? Would you be looking at maybe some sort of exit? Maybe M&G or would M&G maybe take you fully in-house? What's the long-term plan?
A good question, and actually we're going through a strategic review at the moment, just because we always promised we'd do ourselves that service at year 5. I think that our short-term aspiration is to get to 500 million of AUM. That's what we're looking to do over the next year or so. And then I think looking forward into the future, it will be probably all of the above options is what we'll be looking at. And I think some of that what we've tried to do with the brand is we've tried to position the brand such that Atelier could be a lender that focuses on supporting SMEs. So it could be that we look into other value accretive product lines. So that could be in the future investment loans, it could be asset finance, it could be any number of other different finance products that are aimed to support SMEs, or we've left enough headroom in the brand to make it a fully fledged real estate lending platform where it potentially could do things in the future like investment loans, buy-to-let mortgages, anything else that somebody in the future might want to do. So I guess everything is on the table and nothing is off. I think it's very difficult at the moment to have a very, very long-term strategic objective when you're trying to work through the difficulties of the current market. But we want to carry on growing. You know, we don't want to get to 500 million AUM and just leave it in steady state. We're ambitious, and we'll kind of go wherever our investors and shareholders want us to go.
No, bit was staying where you are is effectively going backwards, isn't it?
Of course it is, and it's no fun either. You know, you always want to be challenged with doing something new.
No, that's probably why the last 18 months have probably been quite frustrating when you know that ability to kick on and progress. But I guess having not seen maybe not seen quite as many cycles as you, Chris, you've probably got the experience to know when to push and when to know when to stick. Outside of work, obviously you're very busy man, and you work incredibly hard. But what do you do to sort of help you sort of stay on the straight and narrow? You know, do you got any particular hobbies? You got any particular lifestyle practices that you like to engage in that help you stay balanced?
So I've got no hobbies. I've got no hobbies at all, and very few what I would call kind of. So I'm not a golfer. I don't have, don't do anything that exciting. I do spend a lot of time on fitness and health, which wasn't always the case. And actually, as you get older, you realise the value in that. So I don't drink, I don't smoke, I train most days. It's a bit of a cliche, but you can't look after others unless you look after yourself. It's a bit cheesy, and 10 years ago, I would have thought it was a load of nonsense. But actually, as I've got into my 50s, it's definitely something which is true.
Yeah, and do you the not drinking, not smoking thing? It's quite interesting that it's becoming an increasingly common thing. So Avamore CEO Dimitri, he's been sort of toying with the idea of not drinking for a while, and we had Hugh Wade Jones come on the podcast, Hugh obviously of 10 Capital and Ennis, and Hugh's not drunk for I think about 8 years, and he actually said that Hugh's episode has inspired him to basically give up drinking completely. But it's quite interesting that in an industry that is very social, and a lot of business is done historically in the pub, that business leaders like yourself and like Hugh and like Dimitri are moved, have got this particular have made this particular lifestyle choice. Do you think that's something that's a trend that you think is going to continue?
I think it will.
Presumably you don't need you obviously don't need to have a drink in your hand to be an effective business person now. I
absolutely used to love the drinking culture of the industry pre-GFC. It's where business was done. It was the second office. But I fell out of love with it. I just fell out of love with alcohol, and I didn't enjoy it anymore. And I thought, if I'm not enjoying this, why am I doing it? Because it's comes with consequences, doesn't it? When you're drinking a lot. So I gave it up. I gave it up about 12 years ago. It was the best thing I ever done. I don't regret the years spent in bars and pubs and restaurants and all that kind of good stuff. It makes you who you are. But actually, best decision I ever made. I had better sleep, better skin. It's easier to keep the weight off. You're more present, and it unlocks lots of other things. In fact, when I gave up drinking, I decided to do a master's, and threw myself into that, and that was a big distraction. And Yeah, it's like getting up at 6 a.m. to go to the gym. You probably couldn't do that if you'd had a bottle of wine the evening before. So
No,
it just it
definitely.
unlocks a lot of other things, and it also makes you happier and just emotionally more level. I couldn't speak highly enough of it.
No, but it seems there seems to be a consistent theme about those of your cohort who have decided to
That
make that switch.
said, I will happily go to the pub, happily go out for drinks when we're doing socials and stuff like that. Everyone knows I don't drink. No one bats an eyelid. I'll stand there with a Beck's Blue or something, or a Coke or something like that, and be there to 2 o'clock in the morning if that's what everyone's
Yeah.
doing. I'm not one of these people that tries to keep away from the pub and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you do get a bit bored by midnight when you've been told the same story the 7th time by the person that you're talking to.
Well, quite. And have you got into the habit of cold plunges yet? Has anyone got you into jumping into a cold ice bath yet in early morning?
I'm not doing any of that Instagram stuff. So mine is I don't do any of that kind of meditation or all the other nonsense you see. Getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to the gym. It's not I don't do any of that. I just keep fit, don't drink, don't smoke, eat well, try to keep the weight off. I think that's a decent code.
Well, quite. So penultimate question from me, Chris. If you were to single out one or two people, in your life who you've taken great inspiration from, or who've provided you with great mentorship, does anyone spring to mind, and who would they be?
Without a doubt, my late parents. So I come from a relatively humble but very aspirational working class background. Both my mum and dad worked hard. They taught me and my brother to always ask questions, always be curious, and when you want to do something, to go for it. And that's really driven me. It was the idea that if you want to do something and you think you can achieve it, you shouldn't let anybody hold you back, and you should go for it. And that's something that stuck with me through my entire life. More recently, it's my wife and family, my wife and kids that are those magic people. My wife, I've had a very, as you said earlier on, an entrepreneurial career. We've been here, there, and everywhere. We lived in Essex, we lived in Italy, we now live in central London. She's always supported me following whatever it is I wanted to do, and having that incredibly warm, solid home environment goes a long way to getting you through some of those darker days when you're uncertain, or you're worried. Having that behind you is absolutely essential.
Well said. And I think there are many entrepreneurs up and down the country and around the world who rely on a partner who acts as a stabilizing sort of rock for them. So that's incredibly well said. And I suppose last question, bit of a tradition now. If you were to give some self-talk to your younger self, whether that's your teenage self or in your early 20s when you're still kind of trying to work out what you're going to do, if you're going to give yourself that self-talk, what would you say to yourself, and why?
So if I think about my early career, I jumped around from job to job and employer to employer. I would be saying to my young self, be very, very careful. And I've passed this on to people that work here, some of the younger ones. Be careful what career route you pursue. Be very cautious. Give everything some time to bed in. When you're young, you want everything today, and you're very impetuous. There's a tendency to sort of hop from job to job, 9 months here, 10 months there. I would say to myself, spend a little bit more time thinking about what it is you want to do. I wasted a few years hopping from thing to thing, and I often wonder whether or not if I'd spent that 5 years being a bit more focused, I could have brought the future forward a little bit. It was a waste of time.
Yeah, I guess.
Other than that, I don't really have any regrets about or any advice I'd want to give to myself. Have fun, enjoy yourself. You're only here once. Be nice to people. Have a good ethical or moral compass. You'll do okay.
But I just want to pick up on that point around bringing the future forward, because I think the flip side of that is you're the product of all the experiences that you've had. and perhaps if you'd not had those sort of 4 or 5 years maybe where you're sort of bouncing around, perhaps something else might have, I imagine the product of those experiences means that it's given you the wisdom and maybe some of the abilities and knowledge and experiences that you have today, and you might be a lesser person without them. So
I'd agree, and that's why I caveated the end by saying, live on a no regrets basis, because at the end of the day, you are a product of your past experiences. So I would agree with that as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I you don't have to agree with it, of course, but it's good that we see eye to eye on that. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, Chris, listen, it's been fascinating. I actually can't believe we haven't actually met in person yet, so I think we're gonna have to remedy that. But in the meantime, for our listeners and our viewers, if they want to reach out to you, say hello, to thank you for, I suppose, a very interesting and inspirational conversation, what's the best way for someone to reach out to you and get in touch?
Well, the obvious one is through LinkedIn, just because it's open and public. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I think it's a great medium. So hook up with me. I tend to accept most invites as long as they're not some of the weirder ones you get, or just get in touch through the website. That's the easiest way. And I'm always looking to network, and I love having interesting conversations with people because you pick up things all of the time.
Yeah, well, quite. Well, Chris, once again, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you. I've been Michael Dean. Thank you for listening to the Property Funder or podcast, and for those of you watching on YouTube, again, thanks for your time. If you aren't a subscriber to the podcast, please subscribe, give us a 5-star rating so we can have more interesting and fascinating chats with inspirational people like Chris that we've got today. And all that leaves me to say is thank you, and we'll speak again soon.